what comes first? Is it you innovated something that is amazing and we are going to put a really strong marketing campaign behind it, and then we're gonna figure out how to like get this thing to pop? And it may take some time, but we're gonna do that? Or is it just kind of one of those things where we're only going to take something that we know already is going to deliver? Like, is it the content itself innately delivers because it falls into a category? Or is it the content pops because the content is that great and the marketing team behind it just did a really good job?
I mean, I think it falls into both buckets, but I think going back to the idea of Shonda Rhimes specifically and her creating spaces to do different things down the line, we talk about the idea again of Scandal at the time. I cannot stress this enough, that it was groundbreaking. So what we feel like now is just typical. You're like, okay, there's a diverse cast led by, it's not just a Black focused cast, it's a diverse cast, which is led by a Black character, which was unique and different at the time. What she did then led to Bridgerton today. And now this is something that you just expect. The idea that you could have a show like Bridgerton, which is taking, you know, like, what is it, Victorian era, like old school era of a storyline and infusing Black characters in it in the way that Hamilton does, and it not feel strange, right? Because she's created that space a decade ago. She created the space for that to not be weird. Like, that show could not have happened 10 years ago. Other shows that came after it could not have happened without that happening. So I think that it kind of goes back to the idea where you do need to take a chance and be mindful, because the content that you create and the success of it will only lead to opening doors for other content to come behind that. And I think that we talk about this all the time, where when people see your show does well, like if you're one of the creators like a Shonda Rhimes, the success of her shows got her in deals with Netflix to create more shows, deals with other networks and other platforms to create more content. Now she's proven she could do it, and now she's getting the free reign to do whatever she wants because they trust you. So I think that that's something that we also need to be mindful of in terms of patience. You know, like it might not be the first show that's going to pop, or maybe you think about being strategic. What type of show am I going to present? Like, what's going to be the first thing that I put out there? Knowing that if this thing is successful, I'll have the ability to create other shows. I'll have the ability to tell the story that I want to tell down the line by doing this. This might not be my top pick of a show that I want to do. I might have this really thoughtful idea for some show that is going to, you know, really elevate the culture, do something different, but we might not be there yet. So let me just get this off the ground, prove it, and then I'll have the freedom, I'll have the trust of these studios to be able to create more experimental content, more innovative content that actually does, you know, more for my people.
Yeah, and I think the issue, the complication, if you will, that comes of this is the fact that because of where the money is coming from, the opportunities are almost always coming from organizations or entities that have white leadership. So a lot of times you'll have, like, even if you have Black people within that organization, they still have to convince like a white person that may not understand the value, why this thing is relevant to the Black community. They still have to convince them, like, hey, even though this is maybe a little bit more innovative, this is a little bit more new, like, let's gamble on it because this is why it's relevant to the Black community. And then you have to convince somebody of that may not necessarily understand it. So I'm really into, like, I think as a people, and Rich alluded to this, where he started talking about like how are we moving towards being able to fund our own projects? How are we moving towards being able to create independently, but create at scale? And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot as we go on our entrepreneurial journey, is how do we create, how do we partner with other creators, how do we work closely with other creators to be able to do something at scale that doesn't necessarily need to wait for a white person to understand what I'm trying to do. And I think that does create a gap, but it also makes it hard because as it stands right now, we still have to figure out, okay, we need to create something that is pitchable, that is closable and acceptable, that we can prove is going to be a good investment, even if it may not be my most creative idea, but I know that it's palatable to somebody that doesn't even understand my people to begin with.
I mean, I think that it's just an interesting conversation because we fall into this space where it feels like we're trying to sell people on this idea that we have, you know, with the idea of Do You Know Black in the show. And we've had these meetings with a lot of big brands and organizations and trying to explain to them the value that this has. I think that we're not there yet. It seems like they can see our excitement for it, and they seem to really enjoy the idea, but they don't understand the value, which is what I believe has been holding us up in terms of actually getting them to support it. Because they're like, yeah, this is cute. Like, I love it. But do they understand it enough to get behind it? And really, the people who have the power to actually make things happen for us are not willing to do that because they don't necessarily fully understand it. And I think as creatives, as Black creatives, it's a similar story no matter what you're pitching. You know, I think many creators have been in the same space and they tell their stories in the same way, where it's just like, at the end of the day, if we're not going to get the support, we're just going to fund it and do it ourselves. And that's essentially what we did. We paid for everything on our own because it's like, at this point, we can't sit around and wait for people to believe in it. And we can't sit around and wait for people to fund it. If we want to, if we get the vision and we feel that strongly about it, we'll put the money up and do it ourselves. And at this point, whether it hits or not, like, that's a risk that we were willing to take because we feel strongly and passionate about it. And I think that not every creative may have that ability to do that, where they can just put the money up and put it out. But I think that we're in a time, at least, that, you know, we talk about this back in like the 2000s when there were a ton of Black web series out. Like, everyone's like, I'm not gonna wait for you to sign me or to pick up my show to put this out there. I'm gonna put it out on YouTube. And then now I think that that's how these networks and other things are weighing what's valuable now. If it hits on its own, then they'll pick it up and support you later. And I think that as Black people, we just need to move towards that idea more than ever, where it's just like, hey, if you're really passionate about it, don't waste your years trying to get signed or trying to get it picked up. Just do it. Just do it, get the numbers behind it, and then they'll come to you. And I think that we just need to get more behind that idea.
Yeah, it's funny because in that vein, a lot of corporations or decision makers are basically bandwagon jumpers, right? Like, I think about like the Cleveland Cavaliers. Nobody was a Cleveland Cavaliers fan in like 2001, 2002, but 2003, you know, LeBron is in the city, and it's like now all of a sudden, like, everybody's a Cleveland Cavaliers fan. And then in 2011, 2012, it's like, where did all the Cavs fans go? They went to South Beach, right? So it's like there's this process of a lot of these decision makers. They're kind of like that bandwagon jumper. In a lot of these meetings and these conversations, we've even had it like going back to this idea of not even necessarily censorship, but the idea of what the expectation is from these brands, and how creators, you're operating in a box where you have the pressure you have your own pressure about what you want to create as an artist, which we'll talk about in a second. You have the pressure from your people, where it's like, I want to do something to do justice by my people that my people can be proud of, this goes without saying, but I'll say it again, like, which I do think that in my opinion, I think Shonda Rhimes did, right? Like, I think it's something I could be very proud of, that work, overall, as an artist. But then you also have the pressure from the people that sign the checks. And that usually is what's paramount in our society. So in a lot of our conversations, we've even had people that have said, well, you know, maybe your show is a little bit too serious. Maybe you can lighten it up a little bit. So I'm like, well, like, our show I think the game show is fun. I understand where it is and what it is, but I think it is relatively fun. But then people have kind of alluded to the fact of like, well, how can you dumb it down a little bit? How can you make it a little bit more jovial, like less intense, something just not so serious, right? And in theory, we could be like, okay, sure, let's try to figure that out. But then we're like, well, that's not our vision. No, like, fine. Like, if you don't want to be down with it, then you don't have to be down with it. But this is our vision. We think it's fun enough. It's very informative. There's a purpose to this. The purpose is to celebrate and educate on Black history and culture in a fun and engaging way, while creating safe spaces for non-Black people to learn more about Black history and culture, right? That's the goal. We're not gonna dumb that down because the goal is too important. But so then they're basically like, okay, cool, well, like, we'll get back to you. And then that's kind of end of the conversation. I can imagine a lot of Black creatives that have been scolded in the past. They've gone into those rooms initially and they've had those conversations and they've basically been told, okay, we'll get back to you, or change it, or there's no deal. And then they end up having to figure out, how do I please all of these different entities around me? And that's a lot of pressure and it's very confusing. But that's also why we as a people need to start figuring out, how do we take the power back, right? How do we take power back? We are the minds behind the most amazing trends, right? We are in many ways the pulse of the country. We set trends, we innovate, we do all these new things, but then when it comes to like monetizing, we haven't figured out how we culturally control how our creativity is monetized. So a lot of times we have to go to these corporations, because if they're not giving us the money or they're not funding us, then our idea dies. So how do we make it so that, hey, if they're not funding us, our idea doesn't die, and we could still do that idea at a certain level? So it really goes back to what Rich was talking about, but I just wonder, how does that happen and when does that happen?
You know, at the end of the day, I think that it all relies on having a point of view and understanding why you're doing what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and what you ultimately want the message to be. That's the only way you're going to stay grounded in the idea that you're putting forward. I think sometimes people come out and they'll say, you know, I want to be a filmmaker, I want to be a content creator, but you don't have a strong belief in why you're doing what you're doing, what type of content you're trying to put out. And when those people don't have that understanding, that's when they start going with, you'll see all of the IG creators, you see this on YouTube all the time, these YouTubers, like the family YouTubers or whatever the case may be, where they're taking there'll be like 8 YouTubers who are doing the same type of video. I pranked my husband, boyfriend prank. Like, they all do the same thing. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, it adds no value, but they're making content based on views. They're making content based on what they see other people are making that's getting views, and this is allowing them to get money. I don't think that that's sustainable. And I think that as creators, everybody has to have that idea in mind ahead of time, like, what type of content do I want to create? If we wanted to do that, we would have done that with the type of, even our social posts and things like that. When we were putting out content, we were very mindful about the type of content we were putting out. We could have easily gotten clickbait and gotten more likes by posting certain types of content, but we understood what our vision was and that was not on brand for us. I'm not going to post a post about this because this has nothing to do with the brand, and it's not, we were very grounded in what we wanted to how we felt like we could add value. Our value was, we're able to put out information in an engaging, interesting way, in a different way. We're not going to regurgitate facts that everyone else is talking about for the sake of of getting more clicks. We want to put out content that we understand is lesser known. And to us, we feel like that's more important, to educate people on things that they don't know about rather than jumping onto trends. And I think that as a creator, you need to have that vision early on. Like, what are you contributing? What's your vision? What's your purpose? Because otherwise you'll just get lost in what everybody else is doing. And that adds no value to us as a community at the end of the day. You might be supporting, you might be helping yourself out because you're getting these clicks now on your channel, or people are tuning in to watch your content. But at the end of the day, if it's not adding any value, how sustainable is that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. One of the things that Simone said that I laugh every time I see it, where she was just like, she was alluding to the fact that, you know, there'll be a Black person that creates like a dance and they don't get any credit for it. But like TikTok, right? So they'll create a dance, they don't get any credit for it. But then you'll have like a white TikToker that will do the same dance. They have a bunch of followers, it blows up, and then a corporation will hand them a bag of like their chips and say, hey, do the dance with these chips in your hand, and then they'll get paid $5,000 for it, right? So it's kind of like interesting when you say that. And in all these conversations that I've had, and we're fortunate that we've been able to, I mean, it's required a lot of hours, and we're both like pretty much always exhausted because we have to do everything independently, and because of, you know, we've had a lot of these conversations where a lot of people, I call us like being friend zoned, right? Like that, this is kind of what it feels like, and I'm completely fine with that. So it's almost like, you know, when the guy that's been friend zoned, it's like, oh yeah, you know, you're gonna make a great father one day. It's like, oh really? Because I'm kind of feeling you. Well, to somebody else's kids, not me. You know, like somebody else. That's kind of what it feels like with the content. Like, wow, this Do You Know Black thing, this is amazing. Like, yeah, wow, this is really interesting. This is really fun, or really cool, because I think you guys can make a really good partner, and like our brands can align because you talk about diversity, you talk about uplifting. Whoa. I wasn't talking about us being partners. I mean, if I wasn't working here, yeah, I would be really down with you. But like, I work here, and you know, this is my boss, and this, and the way it's set up, and that's kind of what ends up happening. So it's completely okay. But I started thinking about the fact that what these corporations would want, and thinking about Simone's example where it's like, okay, do a dance, and then, hey, I'll pay you $5,000, probably minimum, to shake these chips while you dance. And I started thinking, like, you know, if we created and I was just thinking about like what would be the most, not the most, but like what would just be something that just does not do anything for the Black community. I'm like, okay, so if we just created like a TikTok page where every day me and you drank a different flavor of Kool-Aid, and who could drink it the fastest, and every day we did that, and then we had 1 million followers. Like, a brand would probably be like, hey, we'll pay you $10,000 to drink a brand of Kool-Aid while wearing my hat, right? And then it's like, that's literally all they would care about. And then it's like, okay, we have a stereotype in there talking about Kool-Aid, right? We have a stereotype in there, but we have 1 million followers. So now we have your hat in there, and then you're giving 10,000. On the flip side, you have creatives that are coming to you and saying, hey, there's this long-term play here in terms of how Do You Know Black can like help change. And this is what we're really focusing on, is trying to, how do we push that side of things to accept a different type of creation that's actually adding value to the Black community. But they don't necessarily get it yet. But if we were to get up to like 1 million followers and 500,000 subscribers, then they would be like, oh, cool, you know, like maybe at that point. So it's just like interesting how the notes that people are receiving and what people would actually put their money back, it really dictates, and it puts handcuffs on Black creatives. Sometimes you'll have creatives that can get through this mess for some reason, but then you'll have the millions of other creatives that have these amazing ideas that the people with money just don't understand. And that's why we have to figure out a way to create a platform, something that, and I'll talk about it briefly and then we can just wrap. It's like, I start looking at platforms, and I'll actually say the different people's names that I have just such a deep respect for. One is Quelly TV, which I have a deep respect for them. in terms of what they're trying to do. Kevon Stage, like, and what he's doing with Kevon Stage Studios, I think that's really cool. It was interesting because he has a cooking show that he was talking about himself that he created, What's Good. And I watched it and I was like, wow, this is actually really well done. And he was saying that before he chose to do it by himself, he was shopping it everywhere. He went to Food Network, he went to all these different places, and he was like, everybody was just saying no. And I'm like, well, he has all of the followers. It's elevating the Black community. It's talking about Black foods, talking about Black businesses, talking about Black restaurants. He has the metrics. He's the personality. Why? If you're not gonna say no to him, if you're not gonna say yes to him, then like, who's gonna get a yes? Like, culturally, he's relevant, etc. So I really wonder like what the decision-making process, what the decision-making process is like there. But I also think about the fact that we need to figure out a way where a Kevon Stage doesn't need a Food Network, but he also doesn't need to self-fund it. And this is the balance that we have to figure out when we start talking about like Black creatives and opportunities and like censorship.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point to wrap. And I think that just tying back to the initial question about, you know, whether we have a responsibility. Yes, we should have the freedom to create whatever we want. But understanding just even in this process, how difficult it is and how much like of a struggle it's been for people to even get their foot in the door, it does warrant a second look at understanding if I'm the person, if I'm a person like Shonda Rimes who has the ear of these networks, understanding how difficult it's been for anyone to get in the door. If I have that, if I get my foot in the door, not only is it my responsibility to help other people get in the door, I should take a look at what I'm putting out there and making sure that, not that you need to censor yourself or anything of that nature, but I should be able to kind of take a look and say, is this elevated? This might be the only thing that we get. If this is the last show with a Black cast or with a Black lead that we get in 40 years, is this something that I can be proud about? Is this something that I was thoughtful about putting out? And I do agree that she was thoughtful in that. But again, I think it goes back to not being a lazy storyteller and not just latching on to a trend that you want that's in a self-serving way. If you get this door open for you, you need to use that.
Yeah, and keep the door open behind you. That's what always people say. So in any event, that we will end on that. Thank you as always for joining us. No matter what, always remember, keep the conversation going. These are just the conversations that we have as we're creating and ideating around, like, do you know Black Kickback? And we're writing the script and doing all that stuff. So we obviously have these conversations amongst ourselves before we put it into the show. So we just wanted to share that with you. So we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We hope it was beneficial and it facilitated some thoughts and sparked some thoughts for you. Make sure to have a conversation with your families, your friends, your significant others, your children, whatever it is. Keep the conversation going.
And in the comments. So drop them below.
Yes,
let us know what you think.
Drop the comments as well. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much again for joining us. This has been the Do You Know Black Creators Kickback. I'm Darnell.
And I'm Alyssa.
Peace.